to you, Gillian.
Thank you so much, and thank you both, first of all, for inviting me. And I feel I'm in very august company. That you've had some amazing women come to talk on your Facebook, on your live stream, on your videos, on your YouTube, and it's just a real honour to be part of this. What I thought I'd talk to you about today is the power of randomness, and to never underestimate the power of randomness. So the question, I guess, is how did a girl from Liverpool who left school at 16 to start an apprenticeship in a car factory find herself some years later as a member of Her Majesty's government as Apprenticeship and Skills Minister? So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my story and how random events have really shaped my journey. So when I was at school, which was a failing comprehensive school in Liverpool, so I guess that was one of the first challenges I had to overcome, which was it was a comprehensive school in Knowsley, which I've since found out, I didn't know at the time, are famous in educational circles as being some of the worst in the country. And whilst I was at school, not many people, in fact, nobody went to university, and I wanted to be a hairdresser. I like my hair, I'm always styling my hair, even still that stayed with me, and that's what I wanted to do. I had a random conversation one day with a teacher, and he persuaded me to apply for a technical apprenticeship in a car factory. A bit random, but I thought I would go with him. I thought, you know, listen to your teachers, and I'd give it a whirl. And I got the apprenticeship, and it was the best decision I ever made. Well, I didn't even really make the decision. I was guided in the decision by somebody else. The apprenticeship I applied for turned out to be what would now be called a rotational degree level apprenticeship. And it was a brilliant foundation. I would say the best foundation for anybody entering into a business career. So that's what I decided to do. I followed that road that was in front of me. I'd learned such a lot during my apprenticeship. I'd studied 1 day a week up to degree level, and I pursued a business career. After about 8 years in the car factory, I started a job in a bank. It was in London, it was NatWest Bank, and I was a very junior manager working on some big contracts with Japanese companies for new payment systems. It's actually the payment systems we use today, the chip and the pin, and in particular the chips that are on the bank cards that we all use today. But years ago they didn't exist, and we had to develop them from nothing. I was the junior manager, and my boss left in the April, and his boss left in the May. And there were some crucial negotiations coming up between the bank and the Japanese companies who were making this technology, and they were scheduled for June. And I was the only one left, basically, who knew anything about it. So there I was. I found myself aged 26. I found myself on a plane going to Tokyo. I'd been outside of the country. I'd been to France and I'd been to Spain, but I'd never been anywhere more than that. So on my way to Tokyo to negotiate multi-million-pound deals on behalf of a bank that I'd not long joined. Again, something completely random. Who would have thought that both my boss and his boss would leave within a month of each other? I did this. I was working in Tokyo for about 2.5 years, and I learned such a lot. It was a completely different culture. It was everything was different. They didn't accept even women in business then. So that was the other challenge I had to overcome. In the Japanese business world in the 90s, as it was, there were very few women working in business. And if they were, even if they were qualified, they'd usually wear a uniform and would bring tea and coffee into a meeting, and were not allowed to speak. So I was highly unusual. I was 26. I was a businesswoman. I was the lead negotiator, and I was taller than most of them as well. So let's just say they found me very difficult to deal with, and I had to overcome a lot of I guess prejudice and misogyny. But in the end, they kind of got used to me and actually made some very, very good friends on that journey. That started a love of international business, which lasted for nearly 30 years. I never thought when I was at school that I would be in international business. But suddenly there I was, I suddenly ended up an international businesswoman. I worked in London, I worked in Tokyo, I worked in New York, and I worked in Madrid. I lived in Madrid for 8 years, and I traveled pretty much all over the world. And I absolutely loved it. I had an absolute ball learning about different cultures. I learned to speak Spanish. And I really enjoyed that part of my career. But because I'd started work at 16, I didn't really, I felt like I'd done an awful lot of work by the time it came to my mid-30s. I'd worked for nearly 30 years without a break, really. And I'd never gone to study full time. And I always felt that even though I had a degree, which I'd done with my apprenticeship, I always felt that I possibly could do more, and maybe I had more to prove. So in my early 40s, I decided I'd go back to study. And this was the first time to study full time since I'd left school at 16. So I'd never gone to full-time university. And the reason I really chose to do this was not only had I felt that I'd been working for a long time, there was many things changing in the world of business. So the internet had come along, that was new, but then the whole social media had come along, and business had changed. Business had become digital. The data was more important than even the products you were selling at times. And I just felt like lots of things had changed around me and I hadn't kept up. So that was the other challenge I had to overcome, which was how do you keep up, particularly as you're getting older, with things that are very fast moving and highly technical. Many things in your working life will change. You probably feel that you understand a lot about the sort of technologies you use now. You've grown up with them, but there'll be something new in your career, and there'll be something new, many things that will be new. And, you know, I have changed many things. I've changed companies, I've changed countries, I've changed colleagues, but technology was changing around me. And I felt like I had to go back and study. And what did I learn at this point? Well, I learned that you're never too old to learn. You don't have a job for life, and you won't have a job for life. You will have a life of jobs, of different jobs. So off I went to London Business School to do something called a Sloan Fellowship. Now, it's quite hard to get into the Sloan Fellowship, and I did really only have my Knowsley Comprehensive School education, plus what I'd learned through my apprenticeship and a business studies degree from Liverpool John Moores University, which was an old polytechnic. And getting into to London Business School was another challenge I really had to overcome. I took the test to get into it and failed the test to get into it 3 times. But I carried on going, and I carried on trying to get better at the test, trying to get quicker, try to just be more accurate, and just try to learn more so that I could pass this test. And I guess I learned that success is just one more try after failure. It's okay to fail, just keep on trying until you get to be successful. And in the end, I got a place. So I'm sat there in London Business School learning all about the latest and greatest new technology, business models, how you finance businesses, investable businesses, lots of things that were really, really interesting to learn. And I'm sat there one day in a lecture theatre, and a professor walked in and she said, everybody in this room's got a 30% chance of living till they're 100. And you're going to all work a lot longer. And people, the way that you'll deal with that is you'll embrace that change, and you won't have one career, you won't have 2 careers, you may have 3 careers. And if you're sat here today, it's because you're curious. So answer this question: what will be your next career? And I have always been curious, and I started to think, well, you know, what could be my next career? But nothing came to mind. And it's a bit like when you're in school and someone says, what do you want to be? Nothing comes to mind apart from I liked doing my own hair, or, you know, sometimes it's what your mum does or your sister does or your dad does or somebody around you or auntie or somebody. Some people have a genuine passion. They've known they wanted to be something for their whole life, but most people don't. So I started thinking, working, and I started exploring, and I started to go to events, and I started to meet different people. So I did all the right things, and sometimes you do all the right things, but nothing came. Then randomly one night, and this is another random event in my random life, my husband and I decided to go to the theatre. And during the interval, we got a glass of wine, and we didn't know anybody. We were just sat there chatting to one another, and we saw somebody that we knew from years ago in Japan. So when I'd been in Japan, somebody years ago we'd met randomly through the Japanese business world and Japanese business contacts. And he was with a friend. And the friend that he was with was a fellow parent. Their kids went to the same school, and she had had a ticket, her husband couldn't go, and she invited him last minute. So we're sat there, we're having a drink in the interval. We started chatting. Next minute, the bell rings, and we all return to our seats. And she said to me, just as I was leaving, "Have you ever thought about becoming an MP?" And I said to her, that's a bit random. Why would I get up in the morning and think, you know what I'm going to be today? I'm going to be an MP. I didn't know any MPs. I'd never been around an MP. So she said to me, come and have a cup of tea in the House of Lords. Now that's an easy invitation to accept, and I'd never been to the House of Lords. So off I went, and I went to the House of Lords for tea. It was another random event, but it started a whole new journey. And I started a completely new world, which was the world of politics, at the age of 46. Now, when you go into a new world, you have to start again, almost. So I'd had a long, successful business career, but nobody was interested in that because I hadn't done anything in politics. So I would go to meet people, and they would say, well, have you been a councillor? Have you worked in public service? Have you ever done anything for anyone else? Or have you just been working in a business? And they couldn't understand that working in a business, obviously you employ lots of people. I'd done lots of things for charity, but none of that counted. They wanted me to have worked in something that showed that I would deliver public service. I would be there for other people. So I started what I call my new apprenticeship, and it was an apprenticeship to be an MP. Now there isn't an apprenticeship to be an MP, so I thought I'm going to design my own apprenticeship. And I used, from all those years earlier, 30 years earlier, what was it that I loved about my apprenticeship? It was going around, getting different skills, learning different things, meeting different people in all the different disciplines within the car factory. And so I sat down and wrote all the things I knew nothing about. The first was the National Health Service. I'd been born in the National Health Service. I'd never even been ill, so I hadn't stayed a night in hospital, but I knew nothing about how it worked. The next was government or local government. I didn't know anything about it worked. So I wrote down a list of all the things that I would need to do to get this experience, to prove to somebody that I could have a shot at being an MP. And I spent the next 3 years doing that. Just on the edge of that 3 years, and I thought I'd probably have 5 years to do that, there was a snap election called. And so in 2014, I'd met Baroness Anne Jenkin, as was her name. She was in the House of Lords. I met her in 2014. In 2017, just about 3 years later, I was elected to become a Member of Parliament for Chichester. And that was also random. The snap election was called. When there's a snap election, not many people get much notice. And there was not that many people around who were already on the list to be an MP. I had stood to be an MP in Liverpool, where I'm from, but I was rejected. And that was another success, is one more try after failure. Sometimes you have to fail to be successful. So 3 years later, I was elected to Chichester, the first female MP in Chichester. And there's lots of female MPs now, about 30%, but in Chichester, they've been sending a member of parliament to some kind of parliament, not even the one we have today, since 1295. So it took them over 700 years to select a woman. Now, not all of those 700 years were women allowed to be MPs, or even to vote indeed, but, and in fact, it was only very rich men at the beginning of time, but 743 years, I think it was, later, they elected me as their first female Member of Parliament. 3 years after that, I became the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills, and I'm the first apprentice to ever be the Minister for Apprenticeships and Skills. So what have I learned along the journey? And these are some of the things I want to leave you with. The first is you can change your mind. In fact, you probably should change your mind. You should never be afraid to walk into an open room, into a room and open the doors. Keep an open mind. In my case, that was hopping on a plane, going to Tokyo. I was terrified. Of course, going into the first business meeting, I was terrified. Walking off the plane, I was terrified. But you should never be afraid to just walk into the room and give it a go. A smile opens doors, and people like being with positive people. And this is very important, because whatever you do in your life, and what I've found in all the different jobs I've done, and even the one I wanted to do if I'd have done that, being a hairdresser, all of them involve you getting on with people, and people like people. They like to be with positive people. Positive people are motivating. Negative people are not motivating. So don't be a negative person, be a positive person. And don't admire problems, solve them. I've noticed there's a lot of people, and you find this a lot in politics, who will talk about the same problems again and again and again, and they'll admire them from a safe distance or from a long distance, but they'll never solve them. So be the person who tries to solve the problem, not just talk about problems. I've said already, but I do believe really it is so important, and particularly when you're feeling down. I've gone through many times in my life where I haven't felt as positive, but success is just one more try after failure. I've applied for hundreds of jobs. I've been rejected for hundreds of jobs. I've applied for courses and I've been rejected. I was rejected by the voters of Liverpool. And, you know, time and time again, I've been rejected for various roles. But if you keep on trying, you will be successful. Get comfortable with feeling uncomfortable. Now, this is where I am now, and I've been uncomfortable many times in my life. The Tokyo business meetings, moving to London was a big step for me from Liverpool. Move to Madrid, I didn't know anybody there. That was also a big step. But right now, the big step that I'm really uncomfortable with and I'm challenging myself on is going onto the television and speaking about politics on telly. Speaking in the chamber was bad enough, but not as many people watch you there. Going on the telly, more people watch you. And then, of course, the other huge anxiety that any politician has, that they have to overcome the fear daily, is clicking on your Twitter icon and seeing what people are saying about you, which, funnily enough, is not always very nice. You should embrace change. You can, and you always should, look to try and learn something new. The philosophy I've lived my life by, and it sounds a bit morbid, but I think it's useful. The first 20 years or so of your life are the years that your parents really shape what you do, where you go to school, even in my case, what clothes you wore, because there wasn't that much money for anything, where you know, what opportunities you get, whether you learn to drive, those kind of things. The last 10 years of your life, you're usually clinging on to your health. In my case, in my family, most people end up with dementia. My grandmothers both had dementia before they died. You know, there's a high chance that the same thing could happen to me. And if it happens, it happens. So that takes 30 years of your life. Now, on average, you'll live till you're, I don't know, maybe 90, possibly 100. You could be one of the 30% that lives to 100. But whatever it is, that really is only 50 or 60 years, which are all your own years, to make your own decisions, to make your own mistakes, to challenge yourself. And the only person that you're ever going to be competing with is your inner self, the person that tells you not to open the door, the person that keeps you from, that makes you hold back, the person. And I was this person who, when somebody asks any questions, you would never put your hand up. I never put my hand up. I was not that person. I was not that confident. So that's a philosophy that I think really drives you to do things that make you feel uncomfortable. So get uncomfortable, feeling uncomfortable. Never, ever underestimate the power of randomness. And I hope your journeys are as random and exciting as mine have been. And I thank you very much for listening to me. And yeah, I look forward to taking as many questions as you've got about anything, about my journey, about anything in politics, and any questions you have, I'll try my best to answer.